Hello, everyone, and welcome back to our virtual Mishnah Berurah share. We're holding in Mishnah Berurah Chelik Hey. We're beginning on Samach Chav Amud Aleph. We're in the middle of Hilchos Pesach, and we are starting Siman Tov Samach Hey now. So, Siman Tov Samach Hey, Dine Mursan BePesach, the laws of bran on Pesach, Uboy Gimel Seifim, and in this Siman we have 3 Seifim. Says the Mechaber in Sif Aleph, Ein Shoirin Mursan L'Tarnagolim B'Shum Panim. We're not allowed to soak bran in order to use it as chicken feed for chickens in any manner. B'shum panim. We can't do it at all. Very strong language here from the Mechaber. B'shum panim. No way to do this. And we'll see in the Mishnah Berurah why he uses this language. V'loi choltin, continues the Mechaber. V'loi choltin, nor can you scald bran. I guess what they would do is they had this way of taking bran and throwing it into boiling water and scalding it. And that was also a way to prepare it for use as feed. Says the Mishnah Berurah in Eis Katan Aleph, Ein Shairin, you cannot soak the bran, Mishum de Machmitzin Kitfua Atzma, because the bran is capable of becoming chametz in the same way that the actual tfua, the actual grain, the actual wheat, can also become chametz. In the Dirshu, in footnote number 1, he just makes mention over here, if you have chametz and you use it to feed your animals, what isurim do you transgress? Which prohibitions do you transgress? So he says over here, if somebody feeds his animals chametz on Pesach, kasav aruch hashulchan sif aleph, this actually might be Siman Aleph, I'm not sure. Aruch hashulchan writes, gimel lavin, you would be transgressing 3 Torah prohibitions, 3 biblical prohibitions. Aleph, lo yisaychal chametz. The pasuk says lo yisaychal chametz. You're not allowed to eat chametz, but the Chazal learned from that pasuk shekol gam iser hana, that included in that iser is also a prohibition to derive any kind of benefit from chametz. Not only are you not allowed to eat chametz, you're not allowed to derive any kind of benefit, and certainly if you feed your animals, you're deriving benefit. Beis, the second prohibition transgressing is the iser of bal yerah, that you're not allowed to see any chametz in your possession. And Gimel, the third prohibition is bal yimatzeh, that chametz may not be found in your possession on chametz. Ve'ein chiluk beinim noisim lehen ba'atzmai. It makes no difference if you're using the chametz and you're feeding it to your animals directly. You're doing it by yourself. Or you ask a non-Jew to do it. Or whether you do it in your property or you do it out of your property. If it's your chametz and you're using it to feed your animals, then you're transgressing all 3 of these prohibitions. Mishnah Berurah is cut in Beis, Mursan, where the Mechaber is addressing this law to Mursan, which we translated as bran. Says the Mishnah Berurah, V'hu adin subin gamkein machmitz. There's 2 different parts of the wheat kernel that we refer to over here when we speak about things other than the kernel itself that we grind into flour. There's what we call mursan and what we call subin. Ula'el b'siman tafton dalid. Earlier on in Siman tafton dalid b'Mishnah Berurah sif katan beis, in this bar it's explained over there mahu mursan umahu subin. Which part of the kernel is called mursan and which part is called subin? From the Mishnah Berurah earlier on, it seems that this is 2 different levels of the chaff. There's a heavier shell, a heavier chaff that comes off when you crush and press or grind the grain. So there's an outside chaff that falls off, and then there's a lighter chaff, a lighter papery chaff that remains still somewhat mixed in with the wheat, and you don't get that out until you finally sift it, until you put it through a sieve, and that will take, so it's like a finer chaff. So over here, the Chavetz Chaim is telling me that whichever one exactly is Mursan and whichever one is Subin, we have differing opinions which one is which, but both of them are capable of becoming chametz.
Why are you giving out the answer?
Va'aklipa shalakash, and as far as the skin of the straw, sha'agarger munach ba'ishakar sprayer, einay machmitz v'kishar kash ba'almadami. This is some kind of a straw. I don't know exactly what this is. Ice cotton gimel. The Mechaber said that you're not allowed to soak the bran for the Tarnagolim b'shum panim, in any way. Says the Mishnah Berurah b'shum panim, Ritzayna loymar, what the Mechaber wants to tell me here is the loymahani sheyehei oimid sham lirois shelo yishu amorsin b'mayim shir mil. It would not help. See, the Mechaber is telling you, you can't do this. You cannot soak bran to go ahead and use it as chicken feed. The Mechaber does not say, and he says, B'shum panim, you can't do it in any way. He doesn't tell you if you want to soak bran to use as chicken feed, you should do it this way, you should do it that way. For example, he could have told you, yeah, you want to soak bran to feed to your chickens, soak the bran, set a clock, make sure that you take it out of the water in less than 18 minutes, less than a sheer mil, so it should not become chametz. What's the problem? So therefore, comes the Chavetz Chaim is telling you that that's exactly what the Mechaber meant when he said that you can't do it b'shum panim, that you cannot do that. You can't stand over it and say, I'm going to soak it for less than 18 minutes. No. Says the Chavetz Chaim, return to Loimar, the Loimahani, it wouldn't help. It doesn't help to say that you're going to stand over the soaking bran and set a clock and make sure you take it out at 16 minutes so that it shouldn't become chametz. The shear is there because this shear of 18 minutes, when we say that something doesn't become chametz in less than 18 minutes, that's only if something is being soaked, you should know it's not going to become chametz in less than 18 minutes. But initially, you're not allowed to soak something in water and without working it. You're not allowed to take flour or over here take bran and throw it into water and sit back and twiddle your thumbs and not work the dough and say, no problem, I have 18 minutes. That you're not allowed to do. Like we said earlier in Tuf Nun Tes Sif Beis, if you look over there, what does the Mechaber say in Sif Beis and Tuf Nun Tes? You shouldn't leave a dough on Pesach without working it even for a second. And we said back then in Siman and Tuf Nun Tes, we said that this comes from a Gemara in Psachim on Mem Beis Amud Aleph, where Rava said, "V'loy sagbia yoda min atanar achetigmar es kalapas." And Rashi, literally that means that a woman who's kneading a dough on Pesach should not remove her hand min atanar, literally means from the oven, achetigmar es kalapas, until the bread is completely finished. And Rashi over there says, what does this mean? Rashi says, al tagbia yoda min atanar, she should not remove her hand from the oven. What does that mean? Kaloimar tehei sekes bebatzek kol shah. If you're making a dough on Pesach, if you're combining flour or grain or in any form, in any way that it could become chametz, including we're saying over here mursan and subin, if you're combining anything that has the potential to become a chametz in water on Pesach, you cannot leave that mixture without working it even for a second. So you can't soak bran to use it as chicken feed because then you're not working the dough. You're just soaking it to soften it up, and then when it's soft, you're going to give it to the chickens. So that's why the Mechaber says, "Ein sharin musan l'tanagolim b'shum panim." You can't do it even if you watch it. It doesn't help. You're not allowed to soak anything that could become chametz and not work it afilu rega, even for a second. V'ayin bir halacha, and at the end of Eis Kat and Gimel, the Mishnah Berurah points you to the bir halacha. And again, the reason he points you to the bir halacha is for a similar discussion to what we just said. If you take a look in the first few lines of the bir halacha here, he says, "Ayin Mishnah Berurah." Look in the Mishnah Berurah. The kasav HaMechaber came. You should know that the reason the Mechaber wrote this, the reason the Mechaber made a point of saying that you can't do this b'shum panim, and that it doesn't help to watch it, is la'afuke midas harambam bazeh. In this, the Mechaber is contrasting his opinion to the opinion of the Rambam. V'ayin sham b'Rambam perikei milchamet umatzah halacha yud ches. If you look in the Rambam, Hilchos chametz umatzah halacha yud ches, Shakasav, the Rambam writes there, shalosh eitzos bazeh. The Rambam actually gives three eitzos, three pieces of advice of how you can prepare your chicken feed. And the first piece of advice that the Rambam gives you is, echad she'achilan miyad, either feed it to them immediately, before it is time to become chametz. Or make sure you stand over the soaking bran, and make sure that it doesn't sit there for a mill. So the Rambam disagrees with this. The Rambam has a different approach. And there's a reason for the Rambam. That's beyond the scope of this shir. But there's a machlokes over here. The Rambam holds you could put the mursan, put the bran into water if you watch it for a sheer mill and make sure it doesn't become chametz. But the Mechaber is telling you no. The Mechaber held you're not allowed to do that, and that's why he wrote B'shum Panim. Now we go to Ois Katan Dalet. The Mechaber said you can't soak the mursan in order to feed it to the chickens. V'loy choltin. You also cannot scald the mursan, the bran, to feed it to the chickens. V'loy choltin. Says the Mishnah Berurah. Chalita, what is chalita? Chalita mikre, chalita is called shamarsichen amayim yofe yofe. We'll have heavily boiling water, so you have a real rolling boil going on here. And then you take the mursan, the bran, the chaff, and you throw it into this heavily boiling water. Even though we see from Chazal and Masechtas Pesachim, we see that scalding grain prevents chimutz from taking place. So why is this problematic? Nevertheless, Asar, we still hold that chalita is forbidden. Mishum she'einanu b'kiyim b'chalita. Because we said earlier, we said earlier in Sif Taf Nun Dalet that we are not b'kiyim, we are not proficient in the process of chalita. We don't understand it. We don't know exactly how it works, and therefore we might not do it properly. V'ayin sham b'Mishnah Berurah, if you look back earlier in Siman Taf Nun Dalet, if Yud Gimel, Kama Prate Dinim Bazeh, there's a more detailed discussion of chalita. Okay, now we go to the Ramah. Let's go back to the Shulchan Aruch, to the words of the Ramah. Hagah. Ukishenoistem lehem sa'irim lechitim lechel. If you give your chickens wheat or barley to eat on Pesach, so now you're not mixing it with water. Now you're not creating a chimutz problem, but you want to give them dry grain. You want to give them kernels of wheat or kernels of barley to eat on Pesach. Yizaher, you should take care, shaloi la'ashlicham b'makam lach, that you don't throw it down in front of the chickens into a wet, moist area. Because if you do, you're going to expose these grains to moisture, and very possibly they will become chametz. And he brings this down from the Ma'ariv Ayil. Says the Mishnah Berurah in Ois Katan Hey, Shaloi la'ashlicham, you should take care not to throw the grain down into a wet place. Hainu mitchila sheish v'mola. Chavetz Chaim tells us the Mechaber over here seems to be referring to after the Zman Iser Chametz, after the beginning of the 6th hour, after 5 hours on Erev Pesach. So I guess in what you would call an idealized day. Remember, when we talk about hours, we're always talking about shoy zmaniyos, proportional hours. We have to divide up the time of the day from sunset to sunrise till sunset. Over here, if it would be a perfect day, so what we would call 11 o'clock. If 12 o'clock would be chatzos, so then 11 o'clock is the beginning of the 6th hour. It's after 5 hours. That's when the Isser Chametz begins, at least midrabanan. So already at that point, Chavetz Chaim is telling me that's when the Mechaber is telling you, make sure not to throw the grain down in a wet place where it may possibly become chametz. V'yesh misha kasav, there are those that write, da'af koydem pesach yesh lizar bazeh, that really you have to make sure not to do this. You have to concern yourself with this problem even before the zman of Isser Chametz. Because if you throw wheat or barley down in a wet area, even 9 o'clock in the morning on Erev Pesach, it's going to sit there. It'll become chametz after the Zman Isser. Unless you plan on standing over the chickens while they're eating, and watch them till they finish eating. And then clean up whatever is left over there. Because if you don't do that, then it may remain there and it might become chametz on Pesach. The Shulchan Aruch Harav takes it even further. The Shulchan Aruch Harav says that you have to be careful of this already from early Yud Dalet, from the Zman Bedika and on. That's when you have to be careful. And this is a discussion that we've had earlier in the context of other halachas throwing out the water that remains from the lisha or the water that you washed the kalim with? At what point do you become responsible for it? At what point do you have to make sure it's no longer in your property? Okay. Says the Mishnah Berurah in Ice Cotton Vav, B'makam Lach, you should make sure not to throw the grain down in a wet area. Va'afilu hinichem b'makam yavesh, says the Chavetz Chaim, even if you throw the grain down to the chickens in a dry area, Taiv lizar shalalite lifneim mayim lishtois ba'id sha'asa'ayru menachem lifneim. If you're going to give them a water bottle that they could drink from, one of those water feeders for the chickens, and you're going to put out dry barley or dry wheat, they're going to drink, they're going to eat, they're going to drink, they're going to eat, they're going to mix the water together with the grain. Ella rather you have to sweep out that area from any grain first, and then give them water to drink. Now we go to Sif Beis. Let's go back into the Shulchan Aruch, Sif Beis. Ein ha'isha safa shafa mursan al basara. A woman cannot smear bran on her flesh, afilu yavesh, even if it's dry. What's at play over here? Says the Mishnah Berurah, nice cut and zayin. Afilu yavesh. Hainu, this is referring to shadar kamahaya. It was their way in earlier times. Lichnais lamerchatz ulahazia. They would go into the bathhouse for a schwitz. When you go to a bathhouse and you have lots of baths running over there, lots of showers going on, it's all steamed up and it's all humid, and they would go in there to schwitz. The losha faguf b'morsan, and then the women would take this bran and they would smear it on themselves. Ubazeh ein kapeda. Really, there's no problem in doing this. Because this bran was not soaked in water. What is she doing? She's putting it on her body, and her body is damp. But what is her body damp from? The body does not have water on it per se. Rakzeya, this sweat, perspiration, from the heat of the bathhouse. And the perspiration of a person, human sweat, does not cause chimutz. The only problem is that you would have to be very, very careful to remove any remaining bran from her body before she washes herself in water, whether she's going to wash herself in hot water or she's going to wash herself in cold water. So, in a nutshell, what the Chavetz Chaim is saying over here, the Mechaber is telling me that the woman cannot put the bran on her body when she goes to the merchatz, even if the bran is dry. Says the Chavetz Chaim, in reality, there should be no issue over here because you're working with dry bran. The only moisture that we have here is the moisture of the sweat, of the perspiration of the guf. Sweat, zeya, is not machmitz. So really, you want to put the bran on your body. It's not going to become chametz from the moisture of the perspiration. Now the only problem is you want to go take a bath or you want to go take a shower. So you have to wash off all the bran first to make sure that there's no remaining on you before you go into the bath or into the shower. Because if there would be, it would become chametz from the mayim, from the water of the bath or the shower. So why is the Mechaber telling me you're not allowed to do this? So says the Chavetz Chaim, however, since the women nowadays are not proficient in doing this, it's not really the custom to do this anymore. By the way, I think the bran, if I'm not mistaken, I think the purpose was as an exfoliant. But since this is not the practice nowadays, and the women are not bekim, they're not proficient at this process, Lefikach, therefore, yesh lamoinam milases mursan al basaram. Therefore, we should teach them to refrain from putting bran on their bodies, like the Mechaber says, afilu hu yavesh, even if the bran is dry. V'im avra v'shafra, and if she did go ahead and put bran on herself, ein lishtoif b'tzainen akazeh ad zman ma, she should not go wash herself in cold water until she takes a break. Sheyadua shekvar over hakoil, until she's sure that whatever bran was on her has already fallen off. A yishtaif atzmai b'mei perais tchila, or she should wash herself off First, using mei peiros, using a liquid other than water, which we say, at least according to most shittas, is not machmitz. So she would theoretically wash herself off with apple juice before she went to shower, so she can make sure to wash off all the bran with some kind of a juice first, even if there was bran on her. The mei peiros ein machmitzin, and now she can go to the mayim because there's no bran left. Now it's interesting that if you look in the Berurah Hagoyla, in the upper left-hand corner of the page, Ois Gimel, that's going on the Mechaber. The Mechaber says, Eino isha shafa mursan abasara. A woman is not allowed to smear the bran on her body. And he brings it down from a Mishnah in Psachim. This is the Mishnah Lamed Tesam and Beis in Psachim. The Mishnah actually rules that this is mutter for the reason that the Mishnah Berurah just explained, because really there's no problem. The sweat is not machmitz, and the mursan is dry, so just make sure it's all washed off before you go into the bath or the shower. But the Berurah Hagoyla also brings down the rush, the cuss of a rusham, to ha'idno yesh lamanon, that nowadays when women are not proficient in this process, they should refrain from doing this. The chen cuss of atur b'shmai, and the Tur quotes the shita of the rush, and that is where the Mechaber and the Beis Yosef took this halacha from. He was basing it on the rush. Okay, now we go to Sif Gimel. Interesting Sif. Im shivshifu mursan ba'avoz lach mimayim. I don't know. I guess this was something that they did. I guess recipes called for this. But an avoz is a goose. So let's say you had a raw goose and you're preparing the goose to cook it, to eat it for your Yom Tov meal. Many, many years ago, my father, Al Rishalom, used to pick up for Shabbos every now and then what was a real delicacy, smoked goose. It was something that there was one store in Borough Park that sold it. There was it's not coming to me what the store was called, but that's what they sold. They sold smoked meats. They specialized in smoked meats, and they had smoked goose. And to tell you what a rarity it is, I'm talking about now probably the early 80s. And in the early 80s, smoked goose was $28 a pound. $28 a pound in the early 80s. So that was expensive. So my father would say Shabbos is free. So that's what the Chazal say. You don't pay for Shabbos. What you spend for Shabbos, l'kavod Shabbos, you get that money back. Now I always, whenever I say that in public, I always point out that doesn't mean that you're going to go to the store and pay $28 for a pound of smoked goose, and suddenly it's going to appear in your wallet. And when you take your wallet out, you're going to find out that you didn't spend $28. But it absolutely does mean that the Rebbeinu Shalom will give it back to you. Now, the Rebbeinu Shalom gives things back to you in many different ways. One way that the Rebbeinu Shalom gives money back to you is that suddenly when you look back over the last 6 months, you realize that your car never broke down, or your children never got ill and you never had to spend a copay, or your glasses last you a lot longer than they usually do, and one day you wake up and you say, I've been wearing these glasses for a long time. That's funny. I usually never get away with more than a year on one pair of glasses or one pair of shoes or whatever it is. So the money does come back. But anyway, I digress. The smoked goose I'm mentioning over here because somebody's preparing goose for Yom Tov. So apparently the recipe over here for the goose called for taking bran and rubbing the surface of the goose, with the raw goose, with bran. So the Mechaber says, Im shivshafu mursan ba'avoz lach mimayim. Let's say you had a piece of raw goose and it was wet, it was damp from water, and now you smeared bran on it. So you have bran, which we said is capable of becoming chametz, and you exposed it to the moisture on the surface of the goose. So mishivshafu mursan ba'avoz lach mimayim. If you smeared bran on the surface of a piece of raw goose that's wet from water, we turn to Samach Vav on the base. Yesh misha omer shaha'avoz aser. There are those that say that this goose is now prohibited. It's now aser. Says the Mishnah Berurah back at the bottom of Samach Vav Amud Aleph. Ba'avoz lach, a wet piece of goose. Ba'tur isa. The Torah discusses this halach in a slightly different vein. He says shesharu hamursan mitchila b'mayim. Now the problem over here was that first they would soak the bran in water, which then we clearly see a problem. If you're soaking the bran in water, it's really going to become chametz. But the Mechaber discusses the halacha in the context afilu b'mursan yavesh, that you're using dry bran. You didn't soak the bran. Rak she'ha'avaz lach b'mayim. The problem of the moisture over here is that the piece of goose is damp from water. The heavy revusa tvei. So the Mechaber is telling me even more of a chiddush. She'afilu b'ma'at lechush sheyesh ala oif, that even from the minute amount of surface moisture that there is on the piece of goose, gam ken machmitz hamursan, that's enough for the bran to become chametz. The aser ha'avaz, and this goose would be aser, afilu lo yadicha yachakach b'mayim, even if you didn't go after you put the bran on and wash it in water or rinse it in water. No, you just had a piece of poultry that's damp from water and you rubbed it with mursan. Aser, because that's enough for the mursan to become chametz. Gam kein machmitz hamursan, the aser ha'avaz afilu lo yadicha yachakach b'mayim rak b'mei peros. Even if you only used mei peros, let's say the recipe called for rubbing bran on the surface of the goose and then pouring some orange juice on it to make your sweet and sour goose. The mei peros is not machmitz, but the mayim, the dampness of the water on the surface of the goose, that's enough to cause a chimus problem. Ice cutting test. So the Mechaber said, Yesh Misha Omer Sha'avaz Aser. There are those that say that the goose is Aser. Why? Because the skin of the goose has in it nikve, many tiny little holes. The nishar sham hamursan, and the mursan, the bran, in some degree will penetrate and remain in those holes. And even if you try to wash the mursan off, not wash, the shafshef means to rub off. Even if you try to rub off the bran and then rinse it, loy mahani, it's not effective because somehow it penetrates. The mursan in these tiny holes is going to penetrate. Now there's a discussion in the Paiskim. What does this mean that the mursan is going to penetrate? Does it mean actual physical presence of the mursan, or does it mean the tam of the mursan? But in whatever it is, there are those that aser the goose because somehow the mursan is going to penetrate. Now we go to the Ramah. The Ramah, back up in the Shulchan Aruch at the top line, Samach Vav on the base, the Ramah says, Haga, v'hachi nohud le'inyan iser chametz shehu b'mashu. We are noyeg with this very stringent chumrah because we're dealing with chametz, which is aser b'mashu. Now let's dive right back into the Mishnah Berurah, it's cut in Yud. V'hachi nohud le'inyan iser chametz. We're going to be noyeg like this very much l'chumrah, because we're dealing with chametz, which is also b'mashu. What the Ramah is trying to tell me here is, you see, if you look in Yeridea, we usually don't say this svar of nikve. If you look in Yeridea, when we learn Isser v'Heter, you'll see a concept that we say that meat has bikaim. Meat has cracks and splits and nooks and crannies where things can penetrate. But when it comes to other isurim, we usually don't say that the iser penetrates into the cracks of the heter, unless we're talking about meat that's hot, meat that's being roasted. Then we say that the heat of the cooking or the roasting softens up the meat, and now iser can penetrate, prohibited substances can penetrate by virtue of these cracks, crevices, and holes. But by raw meat, we generally don't say that. So why are we saying it here by this raw piece of goose? Excuse me. The reason we're saying it here, explains the Ramah, is because here we're talking about an iser chamor of chametz, which is aser b'mashu. Elim kein haya basar reiseach. Normally we don't say this unless the meat is hot. Ayal kol panim mevushel, or it's cooked. Aitzli, or roasted. Derakiche, so that the meat softens up. V'nichnas ba'omek. Then we say that prohibited substances can penetrate into the depths of the meat. But but here we were talking about the very stringent iser of chametz, the isuroi b'mashahu, where chametz is not even bottled in elef in 1,000 on Pesach. Over here we worry about the nikve, the small holes in the goose, even by raw goose. Because we're concerned lest a mashu of chametz remain in one of these little openings. The kasva achrayim yachrayim, right? The afiluim yirtza lahavshit ha'or kulay mimena aser. Even if you're very health conscious and you want to skin your goose because you're worried about the cholesterol, so you'll say, what's the problem? I rubbed the bran on the skin, and now I'm going to take off all the skin. So what's the problem? No, it's still aser. Because the morsan or the tam of the morsan can penetrate the skin and get into the meat. Ice cutting it aleph, the isser of chametz is b'mashahu, the kasra achrayim yachrayim, right? The kavan the ikar tam mishum she'isurei b'mashahu, since the Ramah is saying that this halacha is based on the fact that chametz is aser b'mashahu, but if chametz was not aser b'mashahu, we would treat it like other isurim, and we would not say that the iser penetrates the heter through the nikve, and we would rule that the goose would be mutter. In Cain, the Erev Pesach, so how about if you did this on Erev Pesach? Mishei shoyisu l'mayla, from before this man of iser of chametz, if it's Erev Pesach, even after the Zman Isser of Chametz. Let's remember, we said earlier that even after Chatzos, even after the Zman Isser Chametz, Chametz is not Asr B'mashu until Yom Tov begins, until nightfall. So, you're basing this whole halach on the fact that Chametz is Asr B'mashu. How about Erev Pesach? You were preparing your goose on Erev Pesach, and now you realized, oops, I wasn't supposed to use the bran. To us, this is so foreign. Why would we even have bran in the Pesach kitchen? But fine, they took bran and they put it on the goose on Erev Pesach. Yesh lahater ha'avaz b'shivsha fahatacha heitav v'mayim. In that case, in a b'di'evidik case, you could now go ahead and you could rub off and rinse off the goose very, very well using water. But you would have to eat the goose before Pesach. Because it's possible that there's still a little bit of bran, and even though it's bottled before Pesach, but on Pesach, this is a combination, a mixture of yavesh b'yavesh, dry ingredients, which we said the isser is chayzer v'neir. It reawakens. Even if you had a little tiny piece of bran over here, so on Erev Pesach it was bottled, but once Pesach begins, it's chayzer v'neir. V'yesh makilin af la'ach le'taycha Pesach. There are those, like the Graz, that are makel and say you wouldn't be allowed to eat this on Pesach in a b'di'evidik situation. But makom hefsid meruba, if we're talking about a significant financial loss. Okay, let's go back up to the Ramah. Continues the Ramah. V'yesh li zara shaloy lahavhe ha'oifos bekashin. It's a very interesting halacha. The Ramah says that we should take care not to singe or char our birds using a fire made out of stubble, out of straw. Now, I'm not sure exactly what they were doing here. I know one of the reasons that they would singe poultry is to get the feathers off. Sometimes you get a chicken and it's not so clean and it's got the end pieces of the feathers on it, and you sit there with a knife plucking them out, not so easy. One of the things that makes it easier to get it out is if you burn them off. You don't even have to get them out. You expose it to a flame and the feathers burn. It's a trick that I learned from a takeout fellow many years ago who had the rotisserie chickens. And what he would do is, before, when he was first preparing the chickens, I'm in the store with him one day and I'm looking at him like he's crazy. He has his chickens ready to go on to the rotisserie, and I see him reach under the counter and take out a blowtorch, like a plumber uses to sweat pipes. He takes out the blowtorch and says, "What on earth are you doing?" He says, "I got to torch the chickens." And he lights up the blowtorch and he's torching the chickens. I said, "What are you doing?" And then he showed me. See the feathers? He was burning off all of the feathers. So says the Ramah here, do not burn, do not scorch your poultry using a fire that you made out of the stubble or the straw from grain stalks. Why? Explains the Ramah. Maybe in this pile of fuel, of this stubble and this straw that you're going to use for fuel, maybe mixed in there's a piece of wheat, or there's a piece of grain that already became chametz. V'yitain tam ba'oifos b'shas hahivhuv, and it will imbue tam chametz into the poultry at the time that you're scorching it. Okay, bit of a stretch, but this is what the Ramah says. Let's take a look at the Mishnah Berurah. You should not scorch the oifos, the poultry, using as fuel, stubble or straw from grain. Pirush, the explanation of this is, you did a grain harvest, and you have these stalks and stubble and straw left over from the grain harvest, and maybe it was sitting outside in the field, and maybe it got rained on, it got wet. Vinis chametz. What if there's a kernel of grain left in there in that pile? It will have become chametz, and now you're using it for fuel, and you want to char or singe your Pesach tikkut piece of chicken over this fire. The Hiskimu Achronim says the Achronim are in agreement over here. The Achronim concur, and he brings this down from the Eliyah Rabbah, the Chabad Moshe, the Beis Meir, the Bekar Chaim. This is a real zehirus. Zehirus is to take care, to take great care, not to chas v'shalom, be over an isser, not to transgress a prohibition. This is a great zehirus, a chumrah, lechatchila. But me'ikar adin, as far as the letter of the law, afilu hayasham chitin, even if there was some wheat mixed into this fuel pile, there's no reason for us to have a presumption of isser, to say that wheat or that grain, those grain kernels, had become chametz. And even if we looked in the fuel pile and we saw some kernels of grain, and they're puffed up and they're cracked, and they have siman and chimutz, it's still not going to answer the chicken. Because the bird, the piece of chicken, is not going to touch the hot grain. The hot grain is burning in the fuel pile, and the heat is rising up and hitting the chicken. You hold the chicken up here over the fuel, and it's just the flame that's coming up. Says the Dirshu in footnote 11, they explain this in a little bit greater detail. Very nice footnotes. Well, based on this, Bi'er HaMakar Chaim, the Makar Chaim goes to a little bit greater length to explain this halach in greater detail. As far as Magen Avram, the Magen Avram is the one who says over here that this is not problematic halach at all. I'm sorry, the other way. As far as Magen Avram lesser, why does the Magen Avram say this is usher? That's where this chumrah comes from. It comes from a Magen Avram. Why is the Magen Avram answering this? How does the chametz get up into the bird? Makar Chaim says it must be that in the time of the Magen Avram, they didn't hold the chicken up over the heat of the fire. They actually put the chicken down for a moment into the fire, and they kept turning the chicken to singe it on all sides. Then you have a real problem that perhaps the chicken touched the chametz. But the way we do it in our day, where we're going to hold the piece of poultry up over the fire. There's nothing to worry about. The Beis Meir explains why this is no problem. There's no zeya, there's no moisture of chametz that's rising up in the heat that's going to penetrate the piece of chicken. And we said reicha, the mere heat vapors that are coming up out of this chametz, reicha lav milsa. That halachically we don't recognize that as being problematic. The kanafil reicha in ayalashan. Even here it says here there isn't even any reicha. So he says really over here this should not be problematic at all. This is a chumrah. Just the last three lines of the Mishnah Berurah here. Let's say in your fuel pile, when you're making the fire to singe this piece of poultry, you see a wheat sheave that's breaking down, ready to disintegrating, and you don't see a wheat kernel. I'm sorry, this is not talking about the fuel pile. In a dish, in a cooking dish, you find an empty wheat sheaf. You don't have to worry that maybe there was a swelled up chametz stick, a kernel of wheat mixed in there. The nafal and it fell into your cooked dish and it broke down, and that's why you don't see it. And again, I think this is because, like we always say, we don't have a presumption of isser. So just because you found an empty wheat sheaf, it doesn't mean, oh, there must have been a piece of wheat, and that kernel of wheat must have been mechumetz. No, we don't have to worry about it. Okay, we're going to stop over here, and Amir Hashem will pick up tomorrow with Siman Taf Samach Vav. I see that I have to adjust the title of the shir. I thought we would get into Taf Samach Vav, but we did not. But we did make up another page to catch up a little bit on the Dirshu schedule. Thank you so much for joining me for this Limud HaTorah. The schus of Limud HaTorah should be making against Klal Yisrael. The Rebbeinu Shalom should send refuahs to anybody who needs a refuah, parnasa to anybody who's hurting in parnasa. The Rebbeinu Shalom should send the Geula Shleima b'mehera b'yameinu. Be well.